18,000 companies. That's how many trusted one vendor's software update, and every single one of them let an attacker walk straight in. In 2020, that vendor was SolarWinds, a company hired to help these organizations secure their own networks. The update was digitally signed. It looked completely legitimate, so here's what should stop you cold. One clause, buried in a vendor contract, decides whether a breach like that becomes a lawsuit with your name on it or a mess you quietly survive. Almost nobody negotiates it. Stay with me because that clause is coming, and so is the whole vendor playbook this exam tests.
Fenrir here, and I'm suspicious of that word trusted already. This is Objective 5.3 third-party risk, and it starts from one uncomfortable fact. The moment you plug a vendor into your business, you don't just buy their service. You inherit their security, whether it's good or a house of cards. And that's the part people miss. Their breach doesn't stay their breach. It becomes your breach, your headline, and your regulator asking why your customer's data was sitting on someone else's server. SolarWinds didn't lose those 18,000 networks. The 18,000 did.
Hey all, Kai here. And let's be precise about what SolarWinds actually was, because the exam calls it a supply chain attack. The attackers didn't break into 18,000 companies one at a time. That's slow. That doesn't scale. Instead, they poisoned one thing everyone downstream already trusted. Investigators later tied it to Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, and they buried malicious code, later named Sunburst, inside a routine SolarWinds update. The company digitally signed that update without ever knowing, and then thousands of customers installed it themselves, completely voluntarily because it came from a trusted name. One compromise upstream, thousands breached downstream. That's the whole shape of a supply chain attack, and it's why the exam treats your suppliers as part of your own attack surface.
And that's what makes this the scariest category on the exam. You can lock every door in your own building, but you just handed a key to a vendor, and you have no idea how they store it.
I'm May, and here's the picture I keep in my head. Your security isn't a wall anymore, it's a chain. And a chain doesn't break at its strongest link. It breaks at whichever supplier had the weakest one, 3 companies away from you, on a Tuesday you'll never see coming. You can spend a fortune hardening your own network and still get sunk by a vendor who reused one password. So the good news is that 5.3 isn't a random pile of acronyms. It's one clean lifecycle, 4 moves, and every single term on this exam slots into one of them. Once you see the shape, the whole objective stops feeling like memorization and starts feeling like a checklist you could run yourself. First you assess the vendor, digging into how they actually run security. Then you select one, doing your due diligence before you commit. Then you contract, and that's where the agreement types live. And finally you monitor them, because a vendor safe on signing day can rot by year 2.
And notice the trap hiding in that loop. Most companies do the first 3 once, at the start, and then never look again. Assess, select, sign, forget. The monitoring step is the one that quietly falls off the calendar, and it's the one the exam loves to test.
Which brings us to the line I want tattooed on this whole topic. You can outsource the work. You cannot outsource the blame. Hand off your payroll, your cloud, your help desk, fine. The accountability stays on your desk.
And that's exactly the gut reaction I want to deal with head on, because someone put it perfectly under one of these breach videos.
They did, and it's the honest question everybody's quietly thinking. If a vendor gets breached, isn't that the vendor's problem to fix, not mine? It sounds completely reasonable, but here's why it's wrong. The vendor loses a contract. You lose your customer's trust, your data, and the fine. The regulator doesn't knock on the air conditioning company's door. It knocks on yours. So no, their breach is very much your problem, and that's the whole reason this discipline exists.
So why does this earn a real chunk of your study time? Because Domain 5 is 20% of the whole exam, and third-party risk is the piece where technical people, the ones who can configure a firewall in their sleep, suddenly go blank. This objective is the vendor slice of that domain. Governance is the internal rulebook. Risk management is the dollar math of a loss, and compliance is the audits and the fines. Third party is everyone outside your walls that you still depend on. Own 5.3 and you bank points nobody else in the testing center prepared for. So here's the plan. Fenrir and Kai vet a vendor before we ever sign. Then we settle the agreement acronyms that trip up half the room. And to close it, I'm calling in someone who knows the vendor risk world cold to tell us what the textbook quietly leaves out. One quick thing first. If you're studying for this exam, we've got free practice quizzes for every domain waiting at certs.professorerica.com. So go drill domain 5 while this is fresh. Now let's go vet a vendor, because the most expensive mistake in this whole topic happens before anyone ever signs a thing.
You never take a vendor's word for their security. That's the whole first move, and it's where most breaches are quietly born. A vendor's sales deck always says military-grade encryption. Your job in the assessment phase is to make them prove it before a single byte of your data touches their servers. It starts with due diligence, which just means you investigate them the way a careful client would. How long have they been around? Have they been breached before? Who are their own suppliers? You're building a picture, not filling out a form. And check their financial health too, because a vendor quietly heading toward bankruptcy cuts its security team first, and you inherit that decision. Real questions, verified answers, every claim backed by something you can actually see.
And due diligence is where I earn my keep, because vendors are graded on optimism. So push. Ask for the incident history, not the marketing. Ask what happens on their worst day, not their demo day. If a company gets prickly when you ask how they handle a breach, you've already learned something.
So how do you actually get proof instead of promises? There's a ladder of options, and it climbs from cheap and weak to costly and strong. At the bottom sits the vendor's own word. At the top sits proof you gathered yourself. And knowing which rung a question is describing wins you a whole cluster of points on exam day. On the cheap end, a questionnaire. You send the vendor a list of security questions and they answer them. It's fast, it scales, and it's the first thing everyone does. But it's still just their word typed neatly. A vendor with something to hide fills it out just as confidently as an honest one, and the paper never pushes back.
So you climb the ladder to real verification, and the exam names two big rungs. A penetration test, where a tester actively attacks the vendor's systems to see what breaks. And a right-to-audit clause, which is a line you write into the contract that says you're allowed to come inspect their controls yourself.
And that right-to-audit clause is the one I opened this whole video on. It's the difference between hoping a vendor is secure and having the legal right to walk in and check. Most companies never negotiate it in, and then a breach happens and they can't even see inside their own supplier. Write it in before you sign, or you never get it.
Now, audits themselves come in two flavors, and the exam blurs them on purpose. An internal audit is the vendor grading their own homework. Useful, but they picked the questions. An independent assessment brings in an outside firm with no stake in the outcome. Same test, but a stranger is checking the work.
And the gold standard version of that independent check has a name you'll see everywhere. A SOC 2 report, defined by the accounting profession. It's an outside auditor's verdict on a vendor's security controls. And it comes in two types the exam wants you to separate. A Type 1 report checks whether the controls are well designed on a single day, a snapshot. A Type 2 report watches whether those controls actually worked over months, usually somewhere between 3 and 12. So Type 1 asks, did you build it right? And Type 2 asks, did it hold up? Type 2 is the one you want from a serious vendor.
Hold on. A vendor can pass a Type 2 audit and still burn you?
They can. And that's the honest limit. A SOC 2 only covers the vendor themselves. It says nothing about the vendor's vendors, which is why supply chain analysis exists, where you follow the chain upward and ask who supplies your supplier, all the way back to the raw parts. In software that even has a name now, a software bill of materials, an SBOM. It's an ingredient list of every component inside a product. So when the next Log4 shell drops, you can actually tell whether you're running the broken part.
And you don't have to invent supply chain analysis from scratch. There's an official government playbook for exactly this, published by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Special Publication 800-161. It's the real document security teams open when they build a vendor program. And notice what that page even hands you. A ready-made supply chain assessment questionnaire sitting right there for download. So when a question frames a formal supply chain risk process, this is the world it lives in, and it's completely free.
There's one more piece of selection the exam loves, and it's less technical, more human. Conflict of interest. Before you pick a vendor, you ask a blunt question. Who else profits when this deal goes through? Say the manager choosing the vendor has a brother who works there, or the vendor also serves your biggest competitor. Neither is automatically illegal, but both quietly bend judgment, and the test wants you to flag them out loud instead of pretending they don't exist. Fenrir, you've had a skeptical look this whole segment. Go ahead, hit me with it.
Happily. Here's the one that always trips people up. A vendor waves a shiny SOC 2 report at you, all stamped and official. So why on earth would you still need your own right-to-audit clause on top of that? Isn't the audit the whole point?
Because that report is a photo of the past, taken by an auditor the vendor hired and scoped. Your right-to-audit clause is a door you can open in the future, on your terms, when something actually looks wrong. One is their story about last year. The other is your access this year. You want both.
So we've kicked the tires and picked a vendor we trust, which raises the obvious next question. How do you turn that trust into something you can actually enforce when the vendor lets you down? That's where the paperwork stops being boring.
Before we keep going, one small favor that actually moves the needle. If this is landing for you, tap like, then subscribe and turn on the bell so you do not miss the rest. 2 taps, completely free, and it pushes this in front of more people who need it. The single word that decides who pays for a breach isn't security. It's the type of paper you signed. Pick the wrong agreement and a vendor can walk away clean while you eat the whole loss. This is the contract phase, and it's the most tested corner of 5.3. So the exam hands you a stack of 2- and 3-letter acronyms that all sound like lawyer noise. They're not. Each one does a specific job, and mixing them up is exactly the mistake the test is fishing for.
So instead of reading them like a glossary, run 2 simple questions at each one. What does it lock in, and is it actually binding? Against those 2 questions, the whole confusing family finally separates, and every acronym lands in its own clean box. Start with the one you'll meet most. The SLA, the service level agreement. It's the numbers. It says the vendor guarantees 99.9% uptime, or a 4-hour response, and if they miss it, here's the penalty. And that's the beauty of it. There's nothing to argue about. Miss the target and the credits come off your next bill because the number you both signed does the enforcing for you. An SLA is how you hold a vendor to a measurable promise.
Then the 2 everyone confuses, and I mean everyone. The MOU and the MOA. A memorandum of understanding is a friendly handshake written down. It says here's roughly what we both hope to do together. You'd use one when 2 agencies agree to explore sharing a data center. No money changing hands yet. It's warm, it's vague, and it's not a real contract. A memorandum of agreement is that same handshake but with teeth. It spells out who does what, and it can carry legally binding terms. So the memory hook is simple. Understanding is intention. Agreement is obligation. The one with the extra A actually holds up.
Wait, so I could sign an MOU, feel completely covered, and have nothing enforceable when it all falls apart?
Exactly that. An MOU is a statement of good intentions. And good intentions don't hold up when a vendor's lawyer shows up. That's the trap the exam sets. Word for word. It shows you a broken partnership and asks which document actually protects you. Pick the MOU and you just lost the point and, in real life, the argument.
Then the pair that work as a team. The MSA and the SOW. The Master Service Agreement is the big rule book you sign once. It sets all the boilerplate, the liability, the payment terms, the legal ground rules for the whole relationship. Then every actual project rides on a statement of work under it. The SOW says, here's this specific job, here's the deadline, here's what done looks like. Sign the master agreement once, then fire off a short SOW per project, and you never renegotiate the whole contract again. It's the efficient design, honestly.
And the objective sometimes calls that statement of work a work order, a WO. Same idea, different label. Don't let the two names rattle you on exam day.
2 left, and they're the easy points if you don't overthink them. The NDA, the non-disclosure agreement. It's the confidentiality one. It legally binds the vendor to keep your secrets secret, and it's about the only agreement here that shows up in your personal life too.
And the BPA, the Business Partners Agreement. This one's for when two companies go into business together as partners, not just buyer and seller. It spells out how they split the profit, the responsibilities, and crucially the risk, and what happens if one partner wants out.
And a viewer put the whole confusion in one line under a contract's video, so let me hand it over exactly. An MOU and an MOA sound identical, so which one actually holds up if the vendor walks away? The MOA, every time. If money or duties are on the line and you need it enforceable, you want the agreement, the one with real terms, not the understanding. The MOU is for we're friendly and exploring. The MOA is for we're committed and here's the proof. When it walks, only one of those follows the vendor into a courtroom.
So the paper is signed, the vendor is locked in, and everyone relaxes. And that's the exact moment the real disagreement on my panel starts. Because signing a contract is not the same as trusting a stranger with your keys. So how much should you actually trust a vendor once the ink is dry? The contract is signed. So now the real fight begins, and it's the one that decides your entire security posture. Once a vendor is inside your walls, how much do you trust them? There are 2 schools on this. They genuinely disagree, and where you land changes how you run your whole program. So I've put my 2 loudest people on it. Kay thinks a well-run vendor relationship is built on verified trust and that paranoia doesn't scale. Fenrir thinks you treat every vendor as already breached until proven otherwise. Same signed contract, opposite postures. Kai, make your case.
Gladly, because the math is on my side. You cannot run a business where you assume every one of your 40 vendors is a live threat. You'd never ship anything. So you verify hard up front the SOC 2, the right-to-audit clause, the penetration test, and then you extend real working trust. Earned and checked, not blind, but real. And the payoff is speed. A vendor you actually trust can integrate with your systems, share data, move fast, and that's the entire reason you hired them instead of building it yourself. Lock every vendor in a cage, and you've thrown away the efficiency you were paying for.
And that's exactly the thinking that got 18,000 companies burned. Every one of them trusted SolarWinds. Verified, reputable, signed. And that trust became the highway the attacker drove straight in on. So my posture is simple. Never trust a vendor. Assume they're already compromised and designed for that. Give them the absolute minimum access they need. Wall them off from everything else, and watch every move they make. Treat SolarWinds as untrusted, and one bad update doesn't become a company-ending breach.
Hold on, Kai. Answer his SolarWinds point directly before you move on.
Fair, and it's the strongest thing he's got. But look at what actually failed there. It wasn't that they trusted the vendor. It's that trusting the vendor meant that vendor software could reach everything, with no limits. The trust wasn't the flaw. The unlimited access was.
That's a concession dressed as a rebuttal, and I'll take it. Because we just landed on the actual answer. The argument was never trust versus no trust. It's whether trust comes with limits.
It is, and here's where I move toward you. You can extend trust to a vendor and still cage what that trust can touch. Least privilege on the vendor, segmentation around them, monitoring on top. Trust the company, never trust the blast radius.
See, that I can sign. Zero trust never actually meant hate your vendors. It means the network never assumes a connection is safe just because of who it came from. Verify it every single time, even from a name you trust.
Let me bridge you two, because you're describing the same house from 2 doors. Kai's guarding the front, deciding who gets a key. Fenrir's guarding every room inside, in case someone slipped past the door. A safe building needs both locks, and neither one alone would have stopped SolarWinds. And that's the verdict, straight off the objective. It was never trust versus zero trust, and the exam answer isn't one or the other either. You verify a vendor hard before you ever sign, and then you tightly contain what they can reach after you sign. Do both, and you've actually understood what this objective is testing. So the sourced call is this. Do your due diligence and your independent assessment up front. Then apply least privilege, segmentation, and monitoring so even a trusted vendor's worst day stays small. Trust the vendor. Never trust their unlimited access. And that's zero trust in one sentence. Verify every connection no matter whose name is on it. Run SolarWinds that way, and the poisoned update reaches one walled-off segment instead of the crown jewels. That single distinction is the whole fight settled. Which lands us on the last move in the lifecycle, and the one companies forget. You signed, you contained. Now you have to keep watching, for years. So let me bring in someone who knows that ongoing watch inside out.
A vendor that was rock solid the day you signed can quietly fall apart by year 2, and nobody on your side will notice until it's a breach. That's why monitoring is the last move in the life cycle, and it's the one most programs quietly let slide. The assessment felt like the finish line, so everyone moves on, and the watching just never gets scheduled. The point of monitoring is simple. Security is a snapshot at signing, and a movie forever after. The vendor gets acquired, cuts their security team, swaps in a cheaper sub-processor. All of that changes your risk, and none of it sends you a notice.
And the main tool for it is one we already met just on a repeating schedule, the questionnaire. Not the one-time form from the assessment phase, but a recurring check-in. Every quarter, every year, you ask the vendor to reattest. Anything changed? New breaches? Still compliant? It's cheap, and it catches drift early.
And when you do send a tester at a vendor, you don't just turn them loose. You write rules of engagement first. That's the document that defines the whole scope of the test. Which systems are fair game, which are hands-off, the exact dates and times, and who to call if something breaks. Skip the rules of engagement, and two bad things happen. Your tester might hammer a production system that was never supposed to be touched, or the vendor cries foul and says you exceeded permission. The rules of engagement protect both sides, and the exam wants you to know it's about scope in writing before anyone starts.
And the thing monitoring is really hunting for is the quiet drift. The vendor swaps in a new sub-processor you never approved. A supplier 3 links up your chain gets breached. None of it trips an alarm on its own, which is exactly why a human has to keep looking. That's what continuous monitoring actually means. Not a once-a-year audit, but ongoing checks and threat feeds pointed at your vendors. And a fresh assessment the moment something material changes, like the vendor getting acquired or standing up a data center in a new country.
So let me anchor all of this in the breach that basically wrote Objective 5.3. Because it's not SolarWinds this time. It's a retailer everyone in this room has shopped at. In 2013, attackers stole about 40 million payment cards and personal data on about 70 million people from Target. And they didn't break into Target first. They broke into Target's heating and air conditioning vendor, a small firm called Fazio Mechanical, and used that vendor's network login to step across into Target itself.
Think about that. The way into 40 million credit cards was the company that fixed the fridges. That's third-party risk in one sentence. Your weakest vendor is your real attack surface, and it's almost never the one you were watching.
And this is exactly where I want someone who knows these vendor programs from the inside out, not just the textbook version. So I called in Sonia Vega, who knows third-party risk assessments and vendor contracts cold. Sonia, are you on the line?
I'm here, thanks for having me. Can I say the quiet part first? On the exam, the questionnaire comes back clean and tidy, but in the real world, nobody owns the follow-up, so it gets filed and a whole year of drift goes completely unwatched.
So why not just run a full penetration test on every vendor, every quarter, and be done with it?
Because you'd run out of money by March and the vendors would run out of patience, so you rank them by risk. The vendor holding your customer database gets a deep audit and tight rules of engagement, while the one watering the office plants gets a questionnaire. Effort follows access.
So what's the one thing companies still get wrong, even the ones that do all the paperwork right?
They assess once and never again. Target isn't a story about a missing document. It's a story about a small vendor whose access was never re-examined after the deal closed. The paperwork was probably fine. The watching stopped.
That's the whole life cycle in one answer.
It is assess, select, contract, and then actually keep watching. That last word is where the real breaches live. Thanks for having me on, and good luck to everyone sitting this exam.
Thanks, Sonia. So carry one line out of this whole video. You can hand a vendor the work, but the risk stays yours, so you assess them, you contain them, and you never stop watching. Target signed the contract. What they skipped was the last step, and it cost 70 million people their data. Let's lock the spine. Third-party risk is one life cycle. Assess the vendor, select with due diligence, sign the right agreement, then monitor for as long as they're plugged in.
The line to carry in. You can outsource the work, never the blame. Cage what a trusted vendor can reach, and their worst day stays small.
And the acronyms that trip people. MOU is a handshake. MOA has teeth. SLA is the numbers, and a master agreement plus a statement of work run the actual work.
So here's a move for tonight. Pull up one contract you're actually on and search it for the words right-to-audit. If it isn't in there, you just found the exact gap this whole video was about.
If this made the vendor acronyms finally click, hit like and subscribe so we keep building the Security Plus series straight to your exam, and grab the free Domain 5 quizzes at certs.professorerica.com. Next time the fines get real, the compliance side, and the audit that decides whether you keep taking credit cards at all.
And the one only you can answer. Would you ever sign a vendor with no right to audit clause if it cut the price in half? Where exactly is your line?
Passion without the homework is just noise, so do the homework. Until next time.